Welcome, everyone. My name is Jeremy Smith, and I'm with GrantStation's online education team, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. And that's going to be major grants and their power to propel revenue. Now, your presenter for today will be Susan Schaefer, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, actually. So, Susan Schaefer helps nonprofit leaders fund their priorities through major private grants. She's an author, she's a speaker, and she's a consultant whose firm, Resource Partners, guides clients to secure their largest, most impactful foundation and corporate grants. Now, she has written and contributed to multiple books for the sector and has taught fund development at Johns Hopkins University. Think about GrantStation as your source for finding some of these resources that we'll be talking about today. And with that, speaking of resource, here is the best resource. It's Susan Schaefer. She's going to talk to us all about major grants and their power to propel revenue.
Thank you, Jeremy. GrantStation is a terrific group of people to work with. So I encourage you to look into Jeremy's offer. And I really appreciate the whole team's willingness to offer this webinar today about major grants. I'll tell you this, I get some raised eyebrows when I talk about major grants. But in my opinion, we need to be talking about it more. I know individual giving does provide the bulk of philanthropy. When we look at those little pie charts from Giving USA, it is true that individual philanthropy makes up the bulk of giving in the US. However, if you look at recent trends, individual giving is declining, and the group or the source of funding that has the most consistent increases in revenue is foundations. So I think that it's important for those of us who know that our organizations have had even some moderate or modest success in grants. We need to really come prepared with strategies so that we can talk about grants in the same way that our colleagues talk about gifts. Specifically, we hear a lot about major gifts. And I'm here to tell you that if you are not talking within your office about major grants, you might be missing an opportunity. So let's try to see what we can do to increase everyone's propensity to increase major grants at their own organizations. As Jeremy said, it's worth letting you know how I came to this topic. I've sat in your seats. I was a frontline development and fundraising and specifically foundations fundraiser for years, and really focused a lot on how to increase that largest tier, that top tier of my portfolio. And since then, I went into consulting and have spent many years really refining the strategies that will allow nonprofits of all sizes. And really, the only criteria you need is to have a little bit of success with grants. And then you're going to be, as we'll define in a minute, looking at what you consider major grants. If you want to read more about this topic, not only do I do consulting and a lot of writing, but one of the sources of that writing is a free Substack resource. It's one article a month. It's at majorgrants.substack.com. And I encourage you to look into that for some more resources. I spend a lot of time communicating with people like you and talking about subjects that end up in those articles. So what I want to convey as we begin today is to say that in my recent work as a consultant, what I see is that, number one, the number of very large grants is growing. And very large is relative to the size of your organization. So even for small organizations, the size of grants is beginning to grow for those organizations as well. Additionally, the competition for those grants is increasing because, let's face it, there are just more and more nonprofits every year. So in recent years, I have really niched down to figure out how can we secure more of those large grants for our organizations that are doing such good work. And I hope that our content today will get you down that same path. Here's a quick agenda of ours. We're going to define major grants. We're going to outline some key action steps. And then I'm going to hope that you will go away tailoring this information to your organization. I want you to come away with a customized plan that you can use every day for yourself. So if you haven't seen the handout yet, I'm going to give you a format that you can use. You can jot it easily on a piece of paper or on your laptop, or use the format that Jeremy likely sent you before the webinar. If we don't, this is a short session today, so if we don't get to your questions, as Jeremy said, I hope you will write to me and ask more. I will respond to all of them. And in the meantime, we're going to cover a lot in a short time, so I hope you are ready. Okay, let's go. Let's start by just defining major grants very quickly. To me, major grants are your organization's largest private grants. There happens to not be very much research in this area, but what I try to do as much as possible is equate major grants to their cousins, major gifts, because in that way, your colleagues can understand what you're talking about when you say major grants, since they have so many years experience talking in that individual giving terminology of using major gifts. So in that vein, I would say that no matter the size of your organization, you're looking at your top 5 to 10% of private grants in your portfolio. Consider those your major grants. And importantly, use that name. Give this body of work a name so that when you go around the office and say, hey, I need to talk to you about my major grants strategy for FY25, people know what you're talking about. It's really important to raise the profile of this body of work. And major grants is as much a mindset as it is a way of organizing the work that you do. I highly recommend, again, that you name it, because it will change the way that your work is perceived and conceived. So pretty obvious, but I'll say quickly that major grants ranges the gamut from larger family and independent foundations to corporations, grant-making corporations and corporate foundations, donor advisors and advised funds. Why do I say that? I do a lot of work with donor advisors who have living donors, and frankly, they act like foundations. Your organization may or may not categorize donor advised funds as foundations, but in many cases they do. And so it's important to think of them as part of this body of work. And of course, community foundations also have a variety of grant making initiatives, and some of those are donor advised funds, and sometimes those are just major grants. So this slide is a really important one if your organization does not regularly talk about major grants, or if it does, but you feel like those two areas are siloed and you want to integrate them. I have a long list of overlap between major gifts and grants, and these are just a few of them. They both emphasize relationships and rapport building. They both take a significant lead time, which we'll talk about later, but they say 18 months for a major gift, and it's probably about the same for many major grants. There's an increasing number of large awards on both sides. You need a compelling case for support for each segment of that work, and they both benefit when you've got some very good storytelling mixed in with some very select data points. And finally, they both benefit from a very customized approach to each donor or funder. And you'll hear me say a few times today that they benefit from credibility. That is a big piece that I have found in my work with major grants, is that credibility is something that funders really take note of and grasp onto, because after all, they're investing in your organization, trusting you with their funds. So they want to make sure you are credible. We'll get into what that means again in a moment. Very briefly, why do these awards matter? Obviously, they matter most maybe to you and your performance evaluation, because they offer significant funding. But also, there's that word again, they offer credibility in and of themselves. They allow outside parties to see that a third party has vetted your organization and invested in it. So they bring credibility to the organization, And that often gives you the leverage to then secure additional major grants. Here is something that's really key to my approach to major grants. And Jeremy, if you wouldn't mind posting a short article I wrote recently about this particular virtuous cycle. I call it the major grants virtuous cycle because it shows that you secure revenue. It may be a smaller grant. You build credibility through the fact that that third party has vetted and approved of and invested in your organization. And then, as many of us know, foundations don't enjoy making grants to organizations that do not already have other supporters. So whether it's an organization or a big project, it helps to leverage any existing grant and show your potential funders that you've already got some support. And that leverage tends to bring more revenue. And the cycle goes from there. And that's why I say, no matter how large or small your organization is, you can make this model work for you. We don't have too much time to delve into this cycle, which I think is a terrific way to think about grants. So please check out that article if you'd like to learn more. The last couple of points I'll say about why major grants matter is they can streamline your grants work. It allows you to look at this top 5% or so of your portfolio and create strategies that then trickle down and impact the rest of the work you do. Because I often find that these largest grants, we tend to prepare for them in isolation, and then we go back to doing the kind of annual grants work. Well, why not spend your year preparing for that bigger funder and do so in a very careful way, and then let that work really seep into everything else that you do during the year. Similarly, that work can benefit the whole development department. You can work more closely with your major gifts colleagues, for example, and utilize some of the same collateral we talked about earlier, the case for support, the approach to donors and funders, cultivation and stewardship strategies. So looking at this as major grants really tends to bring a department together in many new ways. So here we go into the nitty-gritty of what we are looking to do today. And this is going to work whether you are looking to launch or to propel your major grants work. There are 3 areas that I think are most important if you're looking to infiltrate major grants into your organization's fabric. Those are awareness, aspiration, and advocacy. And we are going to delve into each of these today. They really have about equal bearing in your success. I don't expect you to be proficient in all of these. You can absolutely pursue major grants, even if your organization is weak in one, but the stronger you get, the more likely these larger, more impactful grants will come in. We'll be looking at each of them with this sort of lens. I was talking with Jeremy earlier about his pup, and I think you can imagine if you look at this slide, when we look at things from the inside versus the outside, you can get a very different perspective on the world. Let's put it that way, particularly when you are these characters that we see on the screen. So what we're going to do today is talk about how we can translate this inside versus outside view of the grants world to those 3 areas I mentioned a minute ago. So this is how it plays out. It's not as complex as it looks here, but we're going to quickly go through internal versus external lenses of your work, and then each of those 3, awareness, aspiration, and advocacy, because altogether, these are the ingredients for major grants. When we say internal, we're talking about the work that you do with your colleagues, and externally is the work with the funders. One more time for emphasis, You do not need to be proficient at all of these things. But what we're going to do today is give you tools to understand which areas your organization might need to work on the most, and that will take you closer to those major grants. Okay, here's your little cheat sheet, which will allow you to come away with a plan. This is approximately the handout that you should have received from GrantStation. But again, no worries if you have not opened it yet. You can just create your own little matrix for yourself. But by the time we leave today, in about 45 minutes or so, I think you will have some very actionable pieces. So I encourage you, I'm going to go through each of these 6 boxes, and please make some notes for yourself about the very specific action steps that you would like to take based on what we discuss. And that will leave you with a terrific plan, hopefully a plan that will take you until the next GrantStation webinar I'm doing, which is on May 9th. We'll talk about that later, but that would be this is a great springboard to that that content. Okay, so I hope you've got your matrix ready, and I'll just say if there are any clarifications, Jeremy, I'll pause for 1 minute to just see if there's anything, any imminent questions or issues, and then I'll move right on.
I think Chris said it best with ready.
All right, great. Here we go. So we're talking now about the internal piece. And this is all about building organizational health. And that comes in so many forms. But one of my leading principles here is that major grants requires leadership. No matter what your title is, you can be a leader on this topic and bring your colleagues along. I've seen it happen with every title under the sun in the grants space. And you might be wondering why you should have your eye on your nonprofit's health. That is probably not part of your job description, but I like to call funders investors. They are investing in your organization's work, and these investors, want to be confident in the stewardship of their funds. So no, you are not responsible for making all of the changes in your organization's health, but you do need your organization to be healthy in order to secure these grants. So we're going to be talking about some of those pieces. It begins with awareness. Your teammates need to be aware of what you are doing. They need to be aware of your work with major grants. Now, I like to call these opportunities grant gatherings. They can take the form of a standalone session where maybe you work with a staff that's somewhat green on the topic of grants, and you need to walk them all the way through what is a grant, what is a foundation, how do we administer the thing, or they might be quite savvy. And you might have a piece of a discussion within a bigger meeting where you say, okay, this is our grant gathering moment, and we've got an RFP coming down the pipeline, and it's the Jones Family Foundation. Here are the criteria. Here's what I'm going to need from all of you. You all know the routine. Here's a time frame. Let's talk about what we want to do here. So I really encourage you again to give name to this conversation, this opportunity to educate your peers at whatever level you find them, meet them where they are, and create a named opportunity to talk about grants on a regular basis so that you don't get lost in the shuffle of emails and other pieces. And again, be prepared to evolve that grant gathering depending on where your organization is in its maturity. Here's an example. I worked with a group that began when the primary grant seeker had a strong feeling that her colleagues just did not understand how crucial their work was to her success, nor how crucial her work was to their salaries. So we created some very tailored agendas that gradually built buy-in from her relevant team leaders. And honestly, it had to start with her executive team. She met first with the CEO and then the C-suite, and then it moved on to a full staff meeting. it led to a much better understanding from all, and led to their cooperation in acting on significant funding opportunities. So you need to be really strategic about what content needs to be heard and who needs to be part of those meetings. So here's what I'd like to ask you to do. Go to that major grants matrix in the row that says, in the column that says internal, and the row that speaks to awareness. Answer these questions for yourself. Would your office benefit from a grant gathering? And if so, jot that down. What will the content be? Will it be about major grants broadly? Or do you need to talk to your team about a particular funder? Maybe it's about a particular process. Maybe you need to educate your executive team first. Who is it that needs to be priority in this grant gathering? And where do you expect the resistance to come? What's the strategy that you think you could use to get those folks on board? So list some topics, list some people that are at the top of your list, and who will be your allies. They may be peers in the development department, consultants if you're using them, even a foundation staff partner can be a useful ally. And if you don't think that your team needs a full-blown meeting, what is an existing convening that you might tack a grant gathering on and make it part of the agenda? So I hope you see where we're going with this matrix. It should be some real specific actionable items that you can undertake related to internal awareness. Okay, moving on, aspiration. We're talking here about organizational vision and planning. And I don't mean the kind of vision that is your mission, vision, values kind of vision. This is what I sometimes like to call a North Star. And that would be, say, a 5 to 7, maybe even 10-year kind of goal, big strategic goal that your organization has that can serve as a rallying point for your organization. And a lot of people think, well, we can get that through strategic planning. In my experience, strategic plans are not the place where these aspirational destinations are developed. The things that we tend to call North Stars, or some groups will call them a moonshot, if it is truly a moonshot, those tend to need their own space to germinate. So I don't want you to feel too despondent if your organization does not have this, but it's, again, something you can talk about over time, because what you can do is get your organization primed for the idea that this is what helps get everyone talking similarly about where the whole organization is going. This is the organizational health angle. We give everyone similar destinations and rallying points. When I work with new clients, I find a very strong correlation between their major grant success and the clarity or quality of their long-term plans. Why does this matter? When I help organizations flesh out those North Stars, they are better able to articulate why and how much they need funders to support them. It carves out a specific place for philanthropy in your work. Let me say that again. Those North Stars carve out a place for philanthropy in your work. It shows people where you're going and allows you to articulate why you need philanthropy in your work. This kind of planning has made the single biggest difference in the groups that I have worked with. So if your organization has a bad taste in its mouth from strategic planning, don't worry. It is not the role of strategic planning to do this kind of visioning. It's really something very separate that the strategic planning tends to build itself into. So let's go to your matrix at this point and go to the internal and aspirational block there and answer this question. Does your organization utilize some kind of planning framework? And importantly, is it working for you? If it's not working for you, are you willing to go to bat for something that works better? So think about who might you need to talk to about this aspirational angle. And if your organization does have a North Star, are you using it to create a context for your major grant proposals? Do you have something substantive to talk to your major funders about? And this goes, you know this, I think, this goes for unrestricted grants as well. You need something really substantive to talk about if you are asking for unrestricted funding. And sometimes we really need to educate our colleagues about that. So this idea of a North Star helps no matter what your request is. It creates a richness and a depth to your organization's thinking and planning, regardless. And from the funder standpoint, it shows funders that they can have confidence in the long game. So take another minute, think about whether you need to suggest your organization take part in a planning session focused on this 5 to 7 to even 10-year goal that you can then build around again. Okay, and finally, let's talk about advocacy. This is not the kind of government-focused advocacy that we tend to hear about related to nonprofits. We're talking about advocating for your needs as the person responsible for major grants. Look, awareness and aspiration do not happen unless you are willing to, do not happen unless you are able and willing to advocate for what it is you need. As we were just saying about your need, let's say for a grant gathering, or your need to develop a bold strategic vision for your organization, you need to feel empowered to advocate for those pieces in order to do your job at your very best. So you can imagine what we're teeing up in terms of that major grant matrix. What is it that you need to go to bat for in order to make your major grants work more successful or even viable in the first place? Let me give you a quick case study here. I once worked with a client who did not really consider herself a grants person at all, but she did excel at it. And the reason was that she did not think she was a good writer. So all of the grants she secured were really based on relationships. And then her very multifaceted job became one that was very focused on grants. And suddenly she decided, geez, I really do need to learn how to write and write in the mold that foundations will appreciate. So she advocated for herself to secure some grant writing professional development. And she did very well and got herself another promotion and another big increase in the expectations related to her revenue goals. So that's how she and I met. She requested some coaching and around major grants because that's what her new position would have entailed. So she and I worked together for some time, and she did a tremendous job in increasing the revenue and that position. And her income goals were increased again. So all of these pieces kept piling on, and she never, she ended up moving to be the VP of development in her department. This was after, I think, 4 different promotions. And I was lucky enough to work with her on and off through all of that. So could see that each time she made a terrific case for the fact that she needed added staff, the fact that she needed some technology to help her do her job better, and so on. Each time her executive team saw the results and saw that they needed to support her because she was advocating and making a very good case for what she needed. So she took a very solid foundation and corporate department and quadrupled the income over just a few years. Then she secured some outlier grants and really changed the reputation of her organization. So it goes back to that cycle we looked at earlier, that advocating for yourself can really help pull that cycle around and around in ways that can be a game changer. So this advocacy piece I know is not easy, but a lot of the things we've talked about so far today play into it. You educate people along the way, you bring them along to a really exciting, visionary, bold destination together. And often your leadership will understand the fact that you need resources for that. So let's look at your matrix. I think you know where we're going with this. This is another crucial practice. You've got to demonstrate feasibility and your ability to advocate for what you need. What do you need right now to take your major grants work to the next stage? Is it specialized training? Do you need added human resources in the form of staffing, part-time work, a consultant, a freelancer to help with some writing? Do you need maybe for someone to lift a burden off of you? Maybe you've got a non-revenue generating part of your job and it's holding you back. Anyway, I think it's really important to think hard about what you need, especially if your organization is close to its budget cycle, and be able to advocate for that. Okay, it seems obvious, that point, I know, but it absolutely plays into everything else we just talked about. So really important to make sure it's part of this bigger strategy. With that, let's look at the external. Oh, that cute puppy again. Okay, so we're talking here about how you can make your major grants efforts stand out vis-a-vis your funders. Now I hope you're in the rhythm of this with me. So we're looking now at external awareness. What does that mean? This one, I'm going right for the idea of how do you get your funders to become aware of your organization or project? It's true that you will not always get a meeting with a funder prior to submitting an application. But the more you can be sure that your funder has seen you, and I put that "seen" in quotations, meaning that they've seen you on social media, they've seen you at a conference, they've seen your website, they've talked to people who know about your organization, the more you can ensure that they've seen you or your organization before you submit a proposal, the better your chances. Now, let's be real candid here. Too many people skip this step, and it's for understandable reasons. Yes, it does take time to do this work. But remember, with major grants, we are only talking about the top 5 to 10% of your foundation portfolio. So you're not spending this time on every funder, just these major grant makers. You're not looking to get in front of everyone. So you want to get to a place where funders ideally are talking about your work. That's the ideal. That might seem far-fetched, but look, we're in a world where increasing numbers of foundations are proactively looking for you. So in that world, you need to make sure that they know about you for that reason as well. Here's an example. It's hard for me to count the number of new clients I've worked with who have told me in our early meetings that they are the best kept secret in their fields. Maybe that is something you can relate to. And, you know, here's one of those examples. When I started working with a youth-oriented program, I asked my little battery of questions early on. And sure enough, the staff had been very diligent about sending off introductory emails to all of its prospective funders, as we all know we should. And I thought, you know, that's obviously a very good practice. But in doing my due diligence, I said, well, that sounds like you're doing things right. let me just take a quick look at those emails and see what you're sending to them, because they were getting 0 responses from folks once they sent out those emails. So I looked at them, and these messages were probably about 8 long, dense paragraphs. And so when I looked at them, I thought to myself, I don't blame them for that approach. They were very well written paragraphs. There was a lot of information there, but there was so much that in my conversations with funders, and frankly, just my reading about the kind of attention span that our fellow citizens tend to have right now, I just knew that those well-crafted messages were not going to be read. So we pivoted to a style of writing that was very punchy and direct and brief, and it got much better traction. So we were making sure that we were getting in front of those funders in a way where we met them where they were. Now, look, that may not be the exact approach for your nonprofit, but this particular group, it was almost immediate, the difference we were making. And in a similar vein, we changed the way in which they were communicating with foundations writ large. And it was a game changer. This was a terrific group, and it was hard for them to understand why they were not getting on funders' radar screens. So one by one, we went through everything they were doing and found ways to make things, really to meet program officers where they were. And it was a game changer. So the awareness shot up, and so did the revenue. It's not something we really learn about in grant writing 101 or even, foundation relations 101. So, the bottom line is, once we help funders learn about your nonprofit, they start talking. That talk leverages your work, and that's where you might get invited to a funder convening, or you might simply get an award. So please look at your major grants matrix, and under that external external column and the awareness row, consider your largest prospect right now. And ask yourself, have you attempted to get in front of that funder with something other than the proposal itself? If not, what initial step can you take? Can you seek out a connection, an email, leave a voicemail? Again, I'm not talking about any old email or voicemail. I mean a well-crafted, succinct, punchy piece of writing that would take as much time to put together as, say, a direct mail piece. It's that important. Another important approach is your organization's public messaging updated and compelling. That might be your job or someone else's job, but it's so important, because you need to allow your program officers to do their own research. If that's their approach, they're going to look at your social media, your website, at some point, all of your external media. And so you want them to be incentivized to reach out to you. So make a note to yourself if you need to revisit with whomever is responsible for it and talk about your social media, your website, all of these external communications. And then make sure that your messaging is something that's going to resonate with funders. That's a huge topic, I realize, but something to talk to the experts about at your nonprofit. Okay, so much we could say about each of these topics, but I'm going to keep us moving. Aspiration. Okay, this is a fun topic, because let's look at this photo here. We're talking about how a funder's aspirations align with yours. But in looking at this photo, think about this. If you love cars, you might love to own the one pictured on your screen right now. But as beautiful as it is, another car lover might decide it is not their thing, because this is a gas guzzler and they only find electric cars beautiful. So in that vein, your visions are similar, but they diverge in very important ways. So the question for you is, do you and your major grant makers aspire to the same things and in the same way? what's really important about this, I'm working with a client right now that has had some opportunity to change the mind of one of its funders because it's not a bureaucratic grant maker. And so they're able to talk about this funder's aspirations and this organization's work and really work to find a happy medium. That is a wonderful kind of partnership to have. Does it happen often? It really depends on the depth of your relationship and, frankly, on often the size of the bureaucracy at that nonprofit. So a more common example would be, I heard a story recently about a nonprofit and a foundation that both focused on health, but they diverged in this way. The funder had preferences for strong data, wanted a data-centric grantee, and the nonprofit just didn't work that way. They called themselves human-centric. And so they really relied on the input of those they served, as opposed to a long list of surveys and data, and they spent time with people and not surveys. So hard to judge that. It's the way that they had operated for decades and were a beloved organization doing a lot of good. So this nonprofit made an attempt to connect with the foundation and learn about its approach. And they decided, I had met them at this point, and they told me the story and asked for my advice. What do we do? This is one of the biggest funders in our field. And frankly, my advice to them was to walk away, because I think about grants so much in terms of a return on investment. And one of those big investments is your time. So I think they ultimately did walk away. I think it was a decision that saved them many hours. So I'm a big proponent of creating strategies that are time efficient. And it's important to make sure that your aspirations do align with your funder and that you not try to change. I could tell a lot of horror stories about what happens when organizations decide to go along with what their funder thinks, even though it's not part of their organization's values or priorities. Does not end well. So in looking at your matrix, think about this. When applying for a major grant, you want to understand as fully as possible the aspiration of your potential investor. Do you have a system to determine early in the process how well your organization's vision aligns with that of your funder? If not, consider creating a checklist or another process that ensures that you either have full alignment to move forward, or that you have the kind of depth of connection that I described a minute ago that might allow you to possibly circumvent the guidelines and try to have a real heart-to-heart about diverging from those guidelines. It's important to state that some foundations will make exceptions, but you've got to think through those real carefully before you spend too much time trying to submit something that doesn't jive with the guidelines. Okay, so our last area here is advocacy. And in this case, we are talking about advocacy that gets at the idea that you cannot do the awareness or the aspirational work without persistence. The biggest mistake I see with major grants is this: grant seekers give up too soon. Let me repeat that. Grant seekers often give up too soon. A call to the funder doesn't get returned, an email doesn't get answered, and people move on to the next thing. You want to have a strategic cultivation plan in the same way that we see with major gifts and their moves management. We want to make sure that in the same way that we know high net worth individuals at our organization get this 18-month runway to a gift, we need to plan for the same thing with major grants. And a quick case study there is that there was a group I worked with. I suggested a funder to them, and this was a new group. And And this shows you how aligned major gifts and grants can be, because from the first time we sent that first well-crafted, succinct email to the time where we sent a second email, we secured a first meeting. The first meeting said, don't submit yet, you're not ready. Wait until this point. We then secured a second meeting. We got permission to draft a proposal, send it to this program officer, get her to review it, and then submit it to a board meeting. 15 months. So that really lines up with what we're talking about with major gifts. The persistence is a real factor, and all of those steps were planned along the way. That submitted proposal ended in a $100,000 grant. The following year, it was another 100,000. Year 3, it was 250,000. And that was last year. So let's hope it goes from there. When you look at your matrix on this topic, I would think about this. The question is, how can you stand out? If you want to stand out as a major grant seeker, you absolutely must advocate for your nonprofit over time. Show confidence in this potential partnership. Once you have determined that, yes, your aspirations are aligned, you've got to advocate for your nonprofit that you know that these two organizations are destined to be partners. Show that confidence to your potential funders. And that is what brings a lot of these organizations ultimately together. So I diverged a bit from the matrix. I could go on about some of these topics. Remember, these are major grants, so you're only talking about the top tier of your foundation's portfolio. So in your matrix, why don't you make some notes about whether or not you have reminders set for those major grant makers so that you don't think about them only in the lead up to a deadline. Do you have a moves management equivalent that you can use? You might call it a cultivation calendar, a stewardship calendar, moves management, whatever it is. It could just simply be quarterly reminders in your, in your calendar. And, maybe a long-term goal is to create a moves management plan for your major grants. Also, it's worth asking, does your leadership understand the need to develop these relationships in a similar vein as they do for high net worth individuals? It's really interesting with some CEOs that they'll understand one bucket, but not the other, or just not have it on their radar screen. If they don't understand it, maybe that's a great line item for your grant gathering, a good agenda item. Okay, so you should have that matrix filled out. I hope you've got some real actionable pieces in there. And, take a couple minutes to build it out after this webinar. And I hope you will find some really specific things you can start doing to move yourself closer to these major grants. I have done this for a very long time, and these are really the areas that start to get this process in motion for most organizations. So let's do a quick poll if we've got that teed up, Jeremy. Do we have a poll teed up?
I will tee it up right now.
Oh, that's okay. If not, just put in your chat. Will you consider adopting some of the elements of a major grants mindset? I'd love to see what you think. Just kind of a yay, nay, and maybe, Jeremy, you can just keep your eye on that and give us a sense of what people are saying. What are the things that you have in mind that you're going to do first? Let us know.
I'm seeing nothing but yeses and definitelys here, and a couple
Excellent.
absolutelys too. So I guess that's a little off the beaten path then.
I love it. Well, I'll say this because I love data. I'll tell you that when I last did this webinar for GrantStation, I asked this question and we formed it as a poll. It was 100%. So I hope that made me feel great. I hope that it means you'll find something that you can do yourself here. And look, I hope you will join me. We talked a lot about pieces that I consider the roadmap to major grants. And on May 9th, I'm really grateful to GrantStation for hosting me again. We're going to be talking about this roadmap to major grants. So we're going to get into some more detail about what it looks like to take your organization on this trajectory from maybe you either don't have a major grants program or you've got one in process, but it's not quite fully formed yet. How do you get yourself, your team, your organization on that track? So I hope you'll join me and maybe even send me some questions if you want. I'll give you my email in a moment. If you want to tee up some questions in advance that I could answer in that webinar, that will be terrific. So maybe Jeremy, you might have the link to that May 9th registration.
Oh, I already have
I'd
it in the
love to see
chat.
you there.
It's already available for
Great.
everybody in there.
Thank you. I'd love to see you there, and I'd love to hear from you related to that. We have a few minutes. Well, Jeremy will tell me whether we have time for questions. I really hope that you will sign up for my monthly little article about major grants. I always love to hear from readers. They do inspire a lot of that content. So please keep me posted on what you're doing, what your challenges are. Subscribe to that, and it gives you a regular monthly opportunity to ask questions. I love to hear from you. So whether about this webinar or major grants in general, please let me know what you're struggling with and your successes. I'd love to hear from you. And thanks so much for your time today. It's really always a pleasure working with GrantStation and its audiences.
Quick note for everyone, you are welcome to leave if you need to. Oh, thank you for the claps there. That's fantastic. But if you want to stick around, we have about 5 minutes. We can fit in a couple questions. We'll try to get them in. We may not be able to get that many in because, of course, every question is separate. Quick note, full recording, you will get it tomorrow. Also, you will get the matrix. You will also get the slides, and you'll also get an email from me because I'll be sending it. So basically, if you have any questions about that, you can always reach out to GrantStation directly, info@grantstation.com. But if you have a specific question about today, you can, of course, reach out directly to Susan. In fact, she challenges you to reach out to her at susan@resourcepartnersonline.com. She'll be happy to answer your question. So speaking of questions, here's a couple that came in through our Q&A section. Lily asks, can you connect with a funder somehow even after you've submitted a proposal and are waiting to hear back?
Yes, well, a lot of it depends, Lily, on whether the funder invited that proposal or not. I think it is foundation lore that the things that annoy program officers the most, or at least on the top 10 list, would be people just asking, did you receive the proposal? I think what they appreciate is some context. So a lot of funders will appreciate a shorter version of a proposal, a concept note or a white paper or something that gives them fodder for a conversation. Kind of goes back to that idea where we talked about earlier, people's attention spans. So if you're applying related to a deadline and you have a specific question, I think it's okay to reach out to them, but you probably don't want it to just be around the idea of whether it has arrived. So I say, if you've got something really substantive to ask, for sure. And a lot of it has to do with timing. If you can contact folks, if you apply really early and then have a question, that's great. Like all of us, program officers get inundated around deadlines. So if you can contact them outside of that space, it tends to be helpful. Otherwise, give them little teasers of what you're working on and aim to get them to help you shape a proposal before it's submitted.
Visit GrantStation to see our latest online education offerings in the form of live webinars, interactive workshops, and on-demand learning. GrantStation.com, your fast track to funding and online education.